Hey everyone, and welcome back to What's the Plan, the podcast where we dive into the matters of our careers in the architecture and urban planning field. I'm Haley.
I'm Andrea. So Haley, what's the plan this week?
This week's plan is all about Zaha Hadid.
So this episode is another In the Hotspot, a series where one of us will be put into the hotspot by answering questions on a specific topic that we want to explore.
These topics include concepts that one of us are unfamiliar with, giving us a chance to learn alongside the listeners as the host in the hotspot teaches us all about it.
So without further ado, here's In the Hotspot, Zaha Hadid.
So as a lot of you might know, I'm not familiar with anything that's architecture related whatsoever.
Yes.
And especially not anything about architects themselves.
Yeah.
So when Andrea asked me to name some that I knew, of course, the only one I could think of was Frank Gehry.
Which I said with very good reason, as he's from Toronto.
Oh, so that's actually something that I didn't know, and that's not why I knew him. The only reason that I knew who he was from that one Simpsons episode.
Oh, yeah.
Where he went to Springfield, and what I remember in this episode is that Marge, she took a piece of paper, crumpled it, and threw it on the ground.
Yeah.
And Frank Gehry took that as inspiration for his next building.
Yeah, so for those who don't know Frank Gehry, a lot of his buildings are like sort of like pieces of either metal that are kind of just like clashing each other, and it kind of looks like, I guess, a crumpled piece of paper. So the Simpsons episode is a very good, I guess.
Yeah, I thought that was so funny. But from that point on, I was like, wow, Frank Gehry is like the architect. But anyway, so I asked you, Andrea, if there were any Starchitects that you know of, and lo and behold, we got
Zaha Hadid. And just to clarify, before anyone asks, no, there is no relation to Gigi Hadid.
And that is a good disclaimer because I literally asked if Zaha was Gigi's dad before even realizing that, first of all, she is a woman. And so why don't you tell us more about who Zaha Hadid is?
So actually, Zaha Hadid was a recognized Iraqi architect, an artist, and a designer in the late 20th and 21st centuries, particularly in civic architecture. So let's just get into a bit of her background first. She was born in 1950 in Baghdad, Iraq, to a wealthy industrialist family. And Zaha actually developed an interest in architecture through the many childhood trips she would go on with her family to the ancient submarine cities in southern Iraq. So that's sort of where, like, I guess Babylon, like, historically was located. So her mother was an artist, and although her father's occupation didn't have any direct influence on her pursuit of architecture, I think it's relevant to point out that, like, he was someone of significance in Iraq. He held several significant political roles in the 1930s and 40s. And he actually led, or that actually led him to co-found the National Democratic Party in Iraq and serve as a minister of finance after the monarch was overthrown in 1958. Yeah, so that being said, like, she is well connected and able to attend boarding school, like, throughout her childhood in England and Switzerland for early education. Yeah, and, like, despite being interested in architecture since she was a child, she actually studied mathematics first at the American University of Beirut in Lebanon for undergrad, and it wasn't until 1972 when she actually moved to London to attend Architectural Association, which is more commonly known as AA, which is a major center for, like, progressive architectural thought during the 70s, and she actually graduated with one of the top honors called the Diploma Prize. So, like, in Canada, we would have sort of the equivalent to that would be, like, getting the RAIC, like, gold prize when you finish your thesis. So clearly she was a star pupil already. And it was actually there at AA where she studied and impressed famous architects such as Elias Zengalis, Rem Koolhaas, and Bernard Schumi. And throughout this experience, she went on to actually work for two of her former professors, Koolhaas and Zengalis, at the Office for Metropolitan Architecture, commonly known as OMA in Rotterdam. And if that is familiar, or the OMA sounds familiar, they're actually the people that did the Seattle Library, which is kind of like a curving ramp. Yeah, so that's, like, their most, I guess, iconic project. And following her professors and her bosses, like, in their footsteps, she also began teaching at AA until 1987. And she held numerous chairs and guest professorships at universities around the world, such as University of Columbia, Harvard, and Yale.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so she has a lot on her resume. And eventually, she branched out on her own, and in 1979, Zaha Hadid started her own firm called Zaha Hadid Architects.
Okay.
Yeah, not very original, but like, it's pretty typical for architects to name their firm after themselves. And if you're sort of like following along to the dates that I've kind of been like mentioning, they seem awfully close apart.
Yeah.
And initially, I was also confused at first because I was just like, wait a second. And when I was researching, I was like, how come like it's only 1970 and then once again 1970? And so I guess to clarify, it's like, yeah, she was only 29 years old, so like 2 years out of master's, and with only 2 years of professional experience when she actually started her own firm.
Oh.
So like that is quite impressive already, because most people, they don't even, I guess some people don't even have like, or their first professional experience that soon, or they haven't even like taken their exams yet to become a fully licensed architect. So for her to want to like start on her own is very brave.
Yeah.
And like a lot of times, like, people don't even found their own firms until like either mid-30s or late 40s when they have a little more experience under their belt.
So at this point, how old would she have been?
Like late 20s and early 30s is when she started her own firm.
Okay.
Yeah. So obviously, given that she was quite young still, and very great into, I guess, the industry, most of her projects her early projects were never built.
Okay.
Yeah. So in spite of the hurdle, in 1983, Hadid shot to international recognition with her competition-winning entry for the Peak, which is a leisure and recreational center on Victoria Peak in Hong Kong, which is why, like, it might sound familiar.
Yeah.
So the concept behind the design was a horizontal skyscraper.
Okay.
And what that meant, it was like, it was sort of, the design of the building moved at a diagonal, or dynamic diagonal down the hillside.
Okay.
So it would like cling to the hill instead of like going straight up as most like typical skyscrapers would. And what she means by, I guess, horizontal skyscraper was that it was a man-made like polished granite mountain. Okay. That is formed through like excavating subterranean spaces. Okay. And to accompany the proposal, Zaha painted several detailed colored paintings to convey her idea.
Okay.
So like, which is also really unusual because mostly you just submit like your architectural presentation drawings. Yeah. But this, I guess, initial like painting is kind of like a reoccurring theme in a lot of her future projects.
Oh, okay. So this wasn't like just specific to this project.
Yeah. Okay. So like given that her mom was an artist, she also was interested in art and painting, so she brought that into her architectural work. Okay. And through this competition, her aggressive geometric aesthetic was established. Okay. And a consequence of no-built projects, her architectural paintings led many to prefer her as a paper architect. Oh. Meaning her designs were too like avant-garde to be actually built. So it's like very nice to look at, but like it's just impossible to build.
So, when you say impossible to build, like, would it be considered functional at all, or just is there question in the functionality of it?
It was more so it's like there are a lot of construction questions, as in like there were not typical details done, so there were a lot of research would require and a lot of, I guess, innovation that is not often like, I guess in the architecture industry, a lot of people are like 20 years behind when it comes to innovation. Right. So they're like really stuck on the ways of wanting to do things the common way and the cheap way. Yeah. So a lot of her designs are a bit too much for people to want to actually build.
Got it. Okay.
So finally, in 1990, she got her first big break in the form of the Vitra fire station in Wellenheim, Germany.
Okay.
Wait, I don't think I'm saying that right, but sorry. Which is actually a small fire station for the factory of a Swiss furniture company, and as the original factory was destroyed by a fire in 1981. So yeah, so there's a reason why there's a furniture store with a fire station because they had a bad experience with fire and they wanted to prevent that.
Okay, so now they're prepared
Yeah, they're preparing, because also it was in a very small town that didn't have a lot of like infrastructure, such as fire stations, so the company needed to put money out on their own to do so.
Got it. Okay.
And like similar to the Peak, the design was composed of a series of very sharp angled planes made of raw concrete and glass, appearing almost like a sculpture.
Wow. Okay.
So like I guess there's some similarities to Frank Gehry
and the paper,
the of the paper. And unfortunately, when it was completed, it only served as a fire station for a brief period of time, as the city soon opened their own fire station.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
So as a result, the building became an exhibition space, which, in my opinion, is a much better suited. And now that she had an actual built project under her belt, she began to get a lot more projects in the future where they become sort of her major works. And it was in the 2000 when this kind of solidified her presence in the industry.
Okay.
And the first of those many projects is the Lois and Richard Russell Center for Contemporary Art in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
Which is a 85,000 square foot building, which opened in 2003. So it's like her first major project was this big art center. And then another project would be the Zaragoza Bridge Pavilion.
Okay.
Which is notable because Hadid ventured into the engineer's domain of bridge construction, a field also occupied by other top architects such as Norman Foster and Santiago Calatrava. Okay. And in both, this bridge is actually both an exhibit hall and a bridge, created for Expo 2008, an event on the themes of water and durable development, which is quite fitting because you have like a building over water. And like her other structures, the Bridge Pavilion is composed entirely of diagonal slopes and curves with no right angles and a very low profile. And the Bridge Pavilion fits smoothly into the grassy landscape along the river. And another major work that she completed was actually the London Olympics Aquatic Center, which many may have seen on TV before but didn't know that was done by her. Okay. And it was inspired by the fluid geometry of water and movement. So as the subject of much comment when it was constructed, and it was the first building for the 2012 Olympics to be built. Oh. But it was actually the last to be finished, given how complicated the design and the geometries were, because, like, once again, there are very minimal straight lines. A lot of curves. Wow, okay. And a much later project is the Hedar Aliyev Center in Baku. It is a gigantic cultural and conference center containing 3 auditoriums, a library, and a museum. Wow. And its fluid form emerges from the folds in the natural topography of the landscape and envelops the different functions of the center. Through the building, when completed, was largely like surrounded by Soviet-era apartment blocks. So like when you look at pictures of it, it's quite catching or eye-popping because you see a bunch of like curves in the horizon when you're surrounded by just like tall apartment towers. Yeah. And once again, there are no straight lines was used in this project. Jeez. And like the shape of the building is wave-like, and the overall view is quite unique, and some people call it harmonic. And another building is the Innovation Tower in Hong Kong, which is for the Polytechnic University, which is also once again lots of straight diagonals, very little straight lines, and a lot of concrete. And considering she was like only and continuing on an upwards trajectory, it was quite sudden and shocking when the world learned that she had passed away in 2016. Oh, fairly recently. Yeah, fairly recently from a heart attack while being treated for bronchitis. Oh no. Yeah, so it was not something that she was aware. No one was aware about it. And at the time of her death, she had left 36 unfinished projects. Which is a lot considering she probably only had like 36 built projects, or even less than that. Including the 2022 World Cup Stadium. Okay. The Antwerp Port House, which actually was completed shortly after her death. Oh, okay. The King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center. Okay. Yeah, and another building in Saudi Arabia. So fortunate for her and those in those projects, her business partner Patrick Schumacher actually assumed leadership of her firm, ensuring the completion of existing commissions and like the procurement of new ones.
Okay.
And he is now still continuing on her legacy of her work and at the firm that's still named after her.
Oh, that's so nice. Wow. So now that we know a little more about who Zaha Hadid is, let's get into why she's significant in the architecture world.
Yeah, so she's significant for mostly, I guess, 3 or 2 reasons.
Okay.
The first being her design is quite unique and very different.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, so a lot of people would describe her work as deconstructivism. Okay. Which, where it stands from is like the aggressive like geometric designs are often characterized by a sense of fragmentation, and instability, and movement. Okay. So like that kind of fits under the deconstructive movement that kind of was started, I guess, in the late 1950s after World War II. That was really popular then, as people were kind of like rebelling from the modern architecture movement, where everything was very minimal, very clean. So so people kind of like attribute her to that group, but she's not necessarily belonging to them. And another element of her design is that because she was sort of known for this fragmented style, she was actually included in a lot of museum exhibits that wanted to talk about that style of architecture, even though she wasn't quite. So that kind of helped propel her into more like larger significance by grouping her into a very rare group of architects. Another design significance of hers is that a lot of her works are really like Neo-Futurism and based on like parametricism. Yeah. So what that means is like she really accepts the use of technology to draw and make models of design, which allow for the design to sort of like very high-tech architecture and do things that like a normal typical human could not like draw on pen and paper. Right. And so, like, the computer would generate the emergence of, like, artistic modes that would have been impossible prior to, like, computer technique. So it's, like, sort of how we mentioned it in the drone episode where, like, these computers can kind of pinpoint one point in space that, like, a person cannot figure out, like, the X, Y, Z of a position. So, like, these computers kind of help her create these, like, wavy, curvy designs that, like, typically you wouldn't know how to execute. And then the last one is Abstractionist, which is the slow liquidity of her lava-like buildings, because they're like kind of wavy, and they broke with like the stiff classical columns of colonial times, or all the European like modernist boxes and grids and symmetries. Yeah. So because she was doing something very different, that also made her stand out. Yeah, for sure. And as well, her detailed colored paintings were often exhibited as works of art in major museums.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Like museums that she designed?
No, like other museums that are sort of honoring that kind of style of work. They're like, oh, she's famous. She has some nice paintings. They look good. And then they want to include it.
That's cool.
Yeah. And like a lot of times these drawings kind of like show a very like pulled apart pieces of like the design, sort of like an exploding axle of the site and program. So like they're not like just like abstract paintings, but they have like a base. And I guess the second main reason why she is significant is that she was the first in a lot of things for a woman in architecture.
I was gonna ask that when we were going through her history.
Yeah. So I don't know if you watched SNL or follow Simu Liu on social media, but just recently, I think like 3 weeks ago, him and Bowen Yang, who is a SNL cast member, they made this whole skit of being like the first Asian American to do something, and like how they would each win awards and try to up each other, saying like, I was the first Asian American to come to Canada or like to move to the States, and then we get medals for it. So in that same way, like how they were kind of became the first Marvel superhero, and that gained significance. She was the first first architect that was a woman to do something, and that really contributed to her celebrity. Wow, okay. Yeah, and a lot of times her unique designs were quite interesting, especially for a woman in a male-dominant industry that also allowed her to get these firsts. But before I dive into some of those like firsts and her praises, what do you think of her so far?
She sounds like an incredibly talented and extremely creative individual. From what you've said, especially when you said, when you talked about her design for the first 2012 Olympic building to begin construction, but was the last to be completed.
Yeah.
That kind of, I think, gave me a really good understanding of what her designs are like and how much thought has to go behind actually putting her designs together.
Yeah.
So even though she's so creative and so must have such like good ideas, I can't help but to think that even though these ideas are so creative, they might not be the best ideas, and they're probably being built to appease her.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like, I don't know anything about architecture. I don't know about, like, how things work really in that world. But so far, I get the idea that she, because of her status, her celebrity status, no matter how crazy and out there her ideas are, and no matter how much people think that her designs may not be possible to build and to like how hard it might be to build, they still will do whatever they can to try to complete her designs and bring her designs to fruition just to make her happy.
Yeah.
So I don't know, at this point right now, I think she's a little out there is my opinion of her.
Yeah, so, like, a reason why a lot of people do like her, because she's out there, is, like, when you want to stand out, you want to do something different, and, like, you would go to her for something different. You wouldn't go to another architect that would just build the same kind of, like, boxy building or boxy museum.
Yeah, like cookie-cutter buildings.
Yeah, exactly. So, because there's a lot of people that do have, like, egos or have reputations they would like to uphold, she has a lot of clients that would want these kind of, like, buildings that are a bit more unique. So let's get into some of the praises and go into the details of the accomplishments that led to her being the first woman in architecture to do something. So in 2004, she became the first woman to be awarded the Pritzker Architecture Prize, which is considered the Nobel Prize in architecture.
Wow. Okay.
Like that equivalent, like the Nobel Peace Prize, the Nobel Science Prize, like that is the award for architects that a lot of people strive to get.
Yeah.
And yeah, she was the first one to do so in 2004, which is pretty early in her career. And even the Pritzker awarding jury also mentioned that, like, although she only had a couple buildings under her belt, they knew she had a very, very promising future. And they wanted to, like, recognize her early.
Right, okay.
So another first for women is the Center for Contemporary Art in Cincinnati, Ohio, made her the first woman to design an American museum.
Wow.
The first woman in American.
Wow.
Like, this is, like, early 2000s. Yeah.
It took that long for... What?
American museum. Yeah, considering how many museums there are in every city, multiplied by all cities in the U.S., it's quite shocking to learn that, like, it took 2,000 years for a woman to design an American museum.
Wow.
So, which is another reason why she was significant. And not only was she the first woman to earn the London Design Museum's Design of the Year, since this award judges designs in architecture, furniture, fashion, graphics, product, and transportation, she was actually the first from the architecture category.
Oh, okay.
So, like...
Wait, sorry, the first, like, overall or first woman in the architecture
So, she
category?
was not only the first architect to be nominated,
she's
also the first woman, because she was the first of
both
genders.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so in addition to being the first woman in a lot of these awards, she has basically won every architecture award out there.
Wow.
But here are some notable ones. So she has won back-to-back Sterling Prize awards in 2010 and 2011, which is awarded by the Royal Institute of British Architects, which is like the British equivalent of like the Royal Architecture Institute of Canada.
Okay.
Which like do do the licensing and certification of architects. Then this Sterling Prize recognizes the best building of a British architect completed in the past year. So it's already difficult to get it once, but to get it back to back is pretty difficult.
Wow, yeah.
And another one is that she was nominated by Times Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, so in the 2010, this happened in 2010, she won the world's top thinker for her innovative designs.
Okay.
And another award was the Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire, which was awarded by Queen Elizabeth II in 2012. And although she was like born and raised in Iraq, she actually became a naturalized citizen of the United Kingdom through her studies and like starting her practice there.
Right.
Which allowed her to get this award. And another unique one is the UNESCO Artists for Peace.
Okay.
I'm not sure what exactly that entitles, but the fact that UNESCO, which normally recognizes like significant heritage or historical places around the world, we're giving awards to actually people and for peace. I think it was quite notable. And another part to her, I guess, allure, her celebrity, is that she actually ventured out into a lot of different art forms. Okay. She also designed furnitures, jewelry, footwear, bags, interior spaces, such as restaurants and stage sets. So, like, stages is actually pretty common because a lot of people that go into architecture and don't actually end up working in the architecture industry, they go into, like, theater design or stage design for a lot of, like, theater, movies, all that kind of stuff. So, it was pretty, like, it's pretty common for people to kind of, like, go that way. And in, like, 2009, she worked with, the clothing brand Lacoste. Oh, wow. To create a new high-fashion advanced boot.
Interesting.
Like, some of her, like, ventures are actually with existing big brands, so it's, like, that also helped propel her even more to, I guess, become a household name. And in 2014, she designed a stage set for the Los Angeles Philharmonic production of Wolfgang Mozart's Così fan tutte, I believe. Oh, okay. So, although there is a lot of praise around her, there is also a lot of criticism. And once again, those criticisms kind of relate back to her being a woman. Oh, okay. When you have a male-dominant industry, honestly, a lot of people would critique that when something about you that stands out also is a downfall. Yes. So because Zaha was a woman, a lot of supporters believed that she was often subjected to controversies that her male counterparts were not a part of. Yeah. And some of these include, I guess, her designs. They considered her elaborate forms were often derided, and the expense and scale of many of her commissions were frequently ridiculed. Okay. So, like, some of her, like, diagonal designs that you would see often, a lot of people would say, like, oh, there are male architects that are doing this, but they're not getting the same criticism, and they contribute that because she's a woman. Yeah. And, like, it already doesn't help that, like, her design was already out there, that a lot of people weren't comfortable with it, but the fact that, like, her profile is, like, different than other people. And, like, some of these critiques were actually the problematic site for the London Aquatic Center, which actually, she already had to, like, scale that back to actually get it built. Wow, okay. So, like, the fact that it was, like, first to start, last to finish, it's like, if she didn't scale it back, it might have not finished in time for the Olympics. Yeah. And another one was actually another Olympic building. There were protests notably for her by actually Japanese architects that led her to scrap the plan altogether for the new national stadium for the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. Oh. And I think the new national stadium actually hosts the judo and matches. And I recall seeing from TV that they just reused the existing one that they had built for a previous Olympics. And I think that probably was because she had to, like, scrap her plans, so they just reused an old building. Another major criticism of hers is actually her partnerships, who she works with. Okay. And one of the major projects that were ridiculed was the Hedar Aliyev Center in Baku, where the building was named for the former ruler of Azerbaijan, Hedar Aliyev, and commissioned by his son Ilham, who became president after his father's death in 2003. Okay. And the reason why this building, the name of the building, who the building was commissioned by, was controversial. It was because the ruler was accused of human rights abuse, balloting irregularities, and intimidating the opposition while in power.
Okay.
Yeah, and several architects or architecture critics who admire the work itself felt that Zaha should have raised questions about this repressive leader, and even as she accepted the commission, others questioned the UK granting its most prestigious architecture award to a building which memorialized a vicious Soviet dictator.
I can see that being a problem.
Yeah, so it's like, that's a little bit controversial. And then a second one is which is still like in major discussions because it's still being built, is the stadium for the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. And the controversy for this didn't start off like based around her. Okay. But because she has a building being built in Qatar and eventually involved her. So what happened was in 2014, a report disclosed that about 1,000 foreign workers had died because of poor working conditions across construction sites in the city. Yeah. And when asked about the deaths in an interview, because her project was about to be built, Hadid had objected to her responsibility as an architect to ensure safe working conditions, and her remarks are widely regarded as insensitive. And her comments themselves became a whole ordeal when a journalist actually published an article claiming that the 1,000 foreign workers died were because of her project, alongside her statement. And obviously that's not true, so she filed for defamation, and luckily she won. Okay. So, like, although initially, like, the 1,000 construction workers didn't really involve her projects, but because her comments and because of her building being built, it's like it kind of involved her, and a lot of people were kind of upset to see that, like, she said that it's not the architect's responsibility to ensure a safe working space when they're the ones in charge of making sure everything is like working. Wow. So yeah, so overall her critics would sum her up with a famously extravagant architectural language and a building for dictators. Oh, jeez. Yeah, so it's like a double-edged sword. Like, sort of a compliment, but also, like, an undercut.
Wow. So from what we've learned so far, what I gather is that Zaha Hadid is a very, as I've mentioned already, creative, exceptionally talented architect. But as a person is a little questionable.
Yes, yeah. So, like, it comes to questions like, can you separate the art and the artist? And should you separate the art and artist? That is still up for debate.
Wow. I guess that also, the fact that she has been questioned about, like, building or designing a building for a dictator goes back to a question we've posed in the past in our podcast, where if we are presented with a project that goes against our beliefs, what we would do. Yeah. And so I guess, I mean, assuming that dictatorship isn't something that Zaha Hadid would have, like, believed in, I guess we know what her answer to our question would have been. Yeah. Wow. So now that we know my thoughts about her, what are your thoughts about her?
So I think when I was learning about her, I was actually, like, conditioned or given a biased opinion. Because I didn't learn about her until I started architecture school in university. Okay. Yeah. And the professor that actually taught us about her, it was a huge critique of her. He didn't like her at all. Really? Okay. He would always, like, what was it? I guess downplay her works. He would always like think like her designs were stupid and all that kind of stuff. So it's like I was conditioned to believing that she was not an architect that we should fully support. But I felt conflicted because, like, learning about her amazing works, her prestige, and her being the first woman to achieve a lot of things, it's like that is significant to me because as a woman who wants to break into the architecture field, it's like I can look up to her as a trailblazer. Sure. But at the same time, like, I do understand where her, like, design controversies and the people that she works with come in. So I feel conflicted. It's like, I do like some of her work, not all of them, but at the same time, like, I do question her ethics.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, that is still up for debate whether I fully like her or fully dislike her.
Yeah. So, now that she has, I guess, passed on, and you mentioned before that her architecture firm is, like, someone else is now looking over it, are there plans to continue on with that architecture firm?
At the moment, yes.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, but also when she passed away and when her business partner actually took charge, there were a lot of issues regarding her estate between her. She didn't have children of her own, but she had put her niece and nephew, I believe, as one of the 4 people that were to, like, I guess, distribute her wealth and figure out, like, her legacy and work that out. And her business partner wanted to take over on all of the aspects and take over the power from all the other 3. Oh. So there was a bit of controversy over, like, how her legacy was going to play out and how her firm was going to play out. But at the moment, Zaha Hadid Architects is still around. And they're still working on a lot of projects.
Right.
And even just now, like, they made this NFT design building for Art Basel in Miami. Wow. So they're still alive and kicking and continuing on her unique designs.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice to see that, like, even though she's no longer here, her ideas are still being brought to fruition.
Yeah. Yeah, and, like, another thing I like about her, or, like about the work that her firm does, is, like, it's not strictly architecture.
Okay.
Because, like, architects, you learn about a lot of different things in order to make a building. You have to understand how, like, whatever you're designing, how people would move through a building and, like, pass through it. So it's nice that, like, these architects are actually exploring different artistic creations or artistic forms, which not a lot of people do.
Wow. So learning about who Zaha Hadid is and her legacy was the plan for now. Listen to our next episode to continue figuring it out with us.
Thanks for following along to this episode. If you liked it, please give it a like, review, subscribe for more, and until then, follow us on Instagram at What's the Plan Podcast for what the next plan is.